Rain pounded relentlessly against the cracked pavement of Chicago's Lower West Side. Footsteps echoed through the suffocating darkness, followed by a heavy, unnatural thud. A young woman walking to her car froze. What she found gasping in the shadows wouldn't just test her medical vows. It would violently rewrite her destiny. The digital clock above the nurse's station flashed 3:14 a.m. Chloe Dempsey leaned heavily against the laminate counter of Chicago's Mercy General Hospital, her eyes burning from the harsh fluorescent lights. 14 hours. 14 hours of stabilizing car crash victims, soothing panicked mothers, and running on nothing but stale break-room coffee and adrenaline. She was 24, deeply in debt from nursing school, and completely exhausted. Pushing her blonde hair out of her eyes, Chloe clocked out, threw her heavy raincoat over her scrubs, and stepped out into the biting October storm. The wind, howling off Lake Michigan, felt like ice against her cheeks. Her beat-up Honda Civic was parked 3 blocks away, a necessity since the hospital's secure parking garage charged a daily rate she simply couldn't afford. She hurried down Halsted Street, keeping her head down. As she turned into the narrow, unlit alleyway, serving as a shortcut to her parking lot, a metallic clatter stopped her dead in her tracks. It sounded like a garbage can being knocked over, followed by a harsh, wet sound. Chloe's breath hitched. She tightened her grip on her pepper spray and took a cautious step backward. "Help!" The voice was barely a rasp, scraping against the sound of the rain. Chloe's nursing instincts, drilled into her over years of grueling training, immediately warred with her basic survival instincts. She took out her phone, ready to dial 911, and clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, illuminating a man slumped against the damp brick wall. He was dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that was ruined, soaked through with rain, and a dark, spreading stain across his abdomen. Even in the harsh light, his face was striking: sharp jawline, aristocratic cheekbones, and dark hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't look like the usual alleyway casualties she treated in the ER. He looked like old money, power, and danger. Chloe rushed forward, dropping to her knees in the puddles. Sir, I'm a nurse. I'm going to call an ambulance." As her thumb hovered over the screen, a hand shot out with terrifying speed, clamping around her wrist like a vice. His eyes snapped open. They were a piercing, cold amber. "No cops," he gasped, his voice tight with agony. "No hospitals. They'll finish the job." "You are bleeding out," Chloe insisted, trying to pry his fingers off. "You need a trauma surgeon." "I need—" He coughed, a terrible rattling sound. "You fix it, or we both die here." He shifted slightly, and Chloe's flashlight caught the dull gleam of a heavy handgun resting on his thigh, his finger perilously close to the trigger. Panic seized her throat, but the oath she took to save lives anchored her. If she called the paramedics, he might shoot her. If she left him, he would be dead in 20 minutes. Okay, she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "My car is right there. Can you stand?" It took an agonizing 10 minutes to drag him into the passenger seat of her Civic. She reclined the seat, threw a beach towel over his torso to hide the wound, and sped toward her apartment in Pilsen. She bypassed 3 police cruisers on Roosevelt Road, her hands shaking so violently she could barely grip the steering wheel. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor, accessible by a rickety fire escape that bypassed the main lobby. How she managed to heave 6'2" of solid muscle up those metal stairs, Chloe would never know. Adrenaline was a terrifying drug. Once inside her cramped, dimly lit kitchen, she shoved everything off the table: mail, a bowl of fruit, her textbooks, and helped him onto the flat surface. He was teetering on the edge of consciousness. "What's your name?" Chloe asked, desperate to keep him awake as she tore open her emergency trauma kit. She had stockpiled supplies over the years: sutures, sterile gauze, lidocaine, and a scalpel. "Dominic," he murmured, his eyes tracking her frantic movements. "I'm Chloe. Dominic, I have to cut your shirt open. This is going to hurt." She didn't wait for his permission. Slicing through the ruined silk and wool, she exposed his torso. The entry wound was clean, just below the ribs on his right side. But there was no exit wound. The bullet was still inside. "I have local anesthetic, but no general," she warned, drawing up a syringe of lidocaine. "You're going to feel the pressure." Dominic gripped the edge of the kitchen table, his knuckles turning white. "Do it!" For the next hour, Chloe's small kitchen became an operating theater. She sterilized her instruments in boiling water, poured betadine over the wound, and went to work. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of copper and the sharp tang of antiseptic. Dominic didn't scream. He let out low, guttural groans, his amber eyes locked onto the cracked ceiling plaster. His jaw clenched so tight, she feared his teeth would shatter. Finally, her forceps struck something hard. With a sickening pull, she extracted a deformed 9mm slug and dropped it into a glass bowl with a loud clink. "Got it," she breathed, her scrubs soaked in sweat. She worked quickly to flush the wound, pack it, and stitch it closed with precise, even sutures. By the time she taped the final piece of gauze into place, her hands finally stopped working and started shaking. She stepped back, dropping the bloody gloves into the trash. Dominic's head lolled to the side, his breathing finally stabilizing into a deep, exhausted rhythm. He had passed out. Chloe collapsed into a wooden dining chair opposite him, staring at the mobster bleeding on her kitchen table. She pulled a blanket over him, locked her deadbolt, and rested her head on her arms. She told herself she would just rest her eyes for a minute. Just until sunrise. Chloe woke to the sound of silence. She jerked upright, her neck stiff and aching. Morning sunlight was streaming through the dusty blinds of her apartment. She looked at the kitchen table. It was empty. Panic flared in her chest. "Dominic!" she called out, her voice cracking. She scrambled out of the chair, checking the living room, the tiny bathroom, the hallway. Nothing. The only evidence that the night hadn't been a fever dream was the lingering smell of expensive sandalwood cologne mixed with iodine, and the bloody towels piled in the sink. As she walked back to the kitchen, a glint of silver caught her eye. Resting on the counter next to her coffee maker was a heavy, unmarked manila envelope. On top of it sat a sleek silver Zippo lighter, deeply engraved with an ornate, commanding letter R. With trembling fingers, Chloe opened the envelope. Inside were thick, banded stacks of crisp $100 bills. She quickly counted the top stack, then multiplied. It was $50,000. "Oh my God," she whispered, dropping the envelope as if it had burned her. She spent the next hour frantically scrubbing her kitchen with bleach, throwing the bloody clothes into garbage bags, and hiding the money beneath the loose floorboards under her bed. She couldn't keep it, but she couldn't exactly take it to the police either. When Chloe arrived at Mercy General for her evening shift, she felt like an imposter. Every time the double doors to the ER slid open, she expected heavily armed men to walk in. "You look like a ghost, Dempsey," her colleague, Sarah Jenkins, noted as they restocked the supply carts. "You fighting off a bug?" "Just didn't sleep well," Chloe lied smoothly, though her heart rate was hovering around 100 beats per minute. Her anxiety proved justified 2 hours later. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Detective Ray Garrison strode into the nurse's station. Garrison was a notoriously aggressive cop with the Chicago PD's Organized Crime Division. He flashed his badge at Sarah before turning his sharp, predatory gaze onto Chloe. "Nurse Dempsey?" Garrison asked, pulling a small notebook from his trench coat. "I'm looking into a shooting that occurred on the Lower West Side early yesterday morning. A witness saw a woman matching your description helping a wounded man into a blue Honda." Chloe's stomach dropped into her shoes, but her face remained a mask of polite confusion. "I'm sorry, Detective. I got off shift at 3 a.m. and went straight home." "I didn't see anyone." Garrison leaned over the counter, invading her personal space. He slapped a photograph onto the desk. "You sure about that? Take a good look. We found a lot of blood in that alley. We know he was hit." Chloe looked down at the photo. It was a surveillance shot, but the face was unmistakable. The sharp jaw, the cold, calculating eyes. "That's Dominic Rossi," Garrison said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "Head of the Rossi Syndicate. He practically owns the docks, the construction unions, and half the politicians in this city. He was ambushed by the Moretti family. If you helped him, Dempsey, you're harboring a major fugitive. And if the Morettis find out you saved him, they'll peel your skin off." Chloe forced herself to look Garrison dead in the eye. "I've never seen that man in my life. Now, if you'll excuse me. I have patience." Garrison stared at her for a long, suffocating moment before snatching the photo back. "If I find out you're lying, sweetheart, your nursing license will be the least of your worries." The rest of the shift was a blur of terror. Chloe couldn't focus. She was caught between a ruthless mafia boss and a corrupt, violent city police force. But her problems were about to multiply. A week passed. The news was dominated by reports of a surging gang war in Chicago, buildings burning, dock workers disappearing. But Dominic Rossi was nowhere to be found. Chloe tried to pretend the money beneath her floorboards didn't exist. That Friday, as she walked out to her car in the employee parking structure, a massive hand grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. It was a man she recognized instantly. Leo, a violent loan shark who held the paper on her estranged brother's gambling debts. Beside him stood a broader, uglier enforcer carrying a baseball bat. "Hello, Chloe," Leo sneered, backing her against the door of her Honda. "Your brother missed another payment. We're tired of looking for him, so we figured we'd come to his successful sister." "I don't have his money," Chloe said, her voice shaking as she reached into her purse for her pepper spray. "I haven't spoken to him in 2 years." The enforcer stepped forward, raising the bat. "Then maybe we break your hands. Hard to be a nurse with shattered fingers, right? Might motivate him to pay up." Before Chloe could scream, the screech of heavy tires echoed through the concrete garage. A sleek, black Lincoln Navigator roared around the corner, coming to a violent halt inches from Leo's legs. 4 men in immaculate dark suits poured out of the vehicle before it was even fully parked. The efficiency of their violence was terrifying. In less than 10 seconds, Leo was pinned against a concrete pillar with a suppressed pistol shoved under his chin, and the enforcer was on the ground, unconscious, his bat kicked away into the darkness. Chloe stood frozen, her back pressed against her car, unable to process the sudden shift in power. The back window of the Navigator rolled down with a soft mechanical hum. From the shadows of the back seat, a silver Zippo lighter sparked, illuminating a striking face. Dominic Rossi exhaled a slow stream of smoke, his amber eyes locking onto hers. He looked entirely healed, radiating an aura of lethal authority. "Get in the car, Miss Dempsey," Dominic said, his voice smooth and commanding. "We have a debt to discuss." Chloe hesitated, looking at the thugs pinned by Rossi's men, and then at the open door of the SUV. Realizing she had absolutely no choice, she slid into the leather seats of the Navigator. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing her in the quiet, climate-controlled cabin with Chicago's most dangerous man. Dominic poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, handing one to her. Her hands shook so badly, she had to hold it with both. "You didn't turn the money over to the police," Dominic noted, his gaze trailing over her tired face. "And you lied to Detective Garrison. Impressive." "How do you know about Garrison?" Chloe demanded, finding a sudden spark of anger to mask her fear. "Have you been following me?" "I protect my investments," Dominic replied coolly, taking a sip of his drink. "You saved my life, Chloe. In my world, a life debt is sacred. Those men outside will never bother you or your brother again." "I didn't do it for a reward," she snapped. "I did it because I'm a nurse. Now let me out." Dominic leaned forward, the faint scent of sandalwood washing over her. "I can't do that. Not yet. You see the bullet you pulled out of me? I had my people run the ballistics." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small, clear evidence bag. Inside was the deformed 9mm slug she had dug out of his flesh on her kitchen table. "This bullet belongs to a registered firearm," Dominic said, his voice dropping into a deadly whisper. "Registered to Dr. Alan Halloway, your chief of surgery." Chloe's blood ran cold. "Dr. Halloway? That's impossible. He's a surgeon." "He's also on the Moretti family payroll," Dominic corrected smoothly. "Your hospital is a front for their money-laundering operations. Halloway tipped them off to my location that night. And now, Halloway knows that a nurse matching your description saved my life. You aren't safe, Chloe. Not from the cops, not from your boss, and certainly not in this city." He reached out, gently tilting her chin up, so she was forced to look into his intense, unyielding eyes. "From this second forward, you belong to me, and I am the only thing keeping you alive." The black Lincoln Navigator glided smoothly down Lakeshore Drive, the glittering skyline of Chicago, standing in stark contrast to the dark, violent reality Chloe had just been pulled into. She sat rigidly in the leather seat, staring at Dominic Rossi. The ambient streetlights washed over his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the expensive cut of his suit. "I have shifts, Dominic," Chloe said, her voice tight. "I have a life. You can't just kidnap me because your enemies are paranoid." Dominic pressed a button on the console, raising the soundproof partition between them and the driver. "I didn't kidnap you, Chloe. I evacuated you." He reached over, tapping his phone screen before handing it to her. "Look." Chloe took the phone. It was a live feed from a security camera. She recognized the peeling paint of her apartment building's hallway in Pilsen. Suddenly, the door to her unit was kicked off its hinges. 3 men in tactical gear swarmed inside, their weapons drawn with silencers attached. When they found the apartment empty, one of them dumped a canister of liquid over her mattress and tossed a flare. The feed cut to static as the room erupted in flames. Chloe dropped the phone, her hands flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. Everything she owned, her nursing degree, her grandmother's photos, her clothes, was gone in an instant. "Dr. Halloway didn't just tip them off," Dominic said quietly, his amber eyes softening as he watched her panic. "He authorized a hit on the only witness. If I hadn't intercepted that loan shark today, you would have gone home to that. The Morettis don't leave loose ends." "Why?" she whispered, tears spilling over her lashes. Why would a chief of surgery get involved with the mob? Because Holloway owes the Moretti family $4 million in underground gambling debts, Dominic explained, pulling a pristine linen handkerchief from his pocket and gently pressing it into her trembling hands. They offered him a clean slate if he eliminated me during a charity gala last week. When I survived and vanished, they panicked. The SUV descended into a subterranean parking garage beneath a towering luxury high-rise in the Gold Coast. Dominic's men flanked them the moment the doors opened, escorting them up a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a fortress of marble, glass, and steel. "You'll stay in the East Wing," Dominic instructed, shrugging off his suit jacket. "My men guard the perimeter. No one knows this property belongs to the Rossi Syndicate. You are completely safe here." For 3 days, Chloe lived in a gilded cage. She had access to a wardrobe of designer clothes that mysteriously fit perfectly, gourmet meals prepared by a private chef, and an unobstructed view of the city she could no longer safely walk in. But the isolation gnawed at her, and the tension between her and Dominic thickened every time he entered a room. He was ruthless when conducting business. She often heard him barking orders over the phone about shipping crates, union strikes, and retaliatory strikes against Moretti fronts. But with her, he was entirely different. He was attentive, almost dangerously gentle. On the 4th night, Dominic sat on the velvet sofa in the study, a glass of Macallan 25 in his hand, looking unusually exhausted. "Let me check your stitches," Chloe murmured, breaking the silence. He didn't argue. He set his glass down and unbuttoned his dress shirt. The bruising around his torso had faded to a dull yellow, and the incision was healing perfectly. As Chloe's fingertips traced the medical tape, Dominic's breath hitched. He caught her hand, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "You saved my life, Chloe," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I've been surrounded by killers and sycophants my entire life. You are the only person who has ever touched me just to heal me." The air in the room grew heavy, electric. Chloe looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was terrified of him, yet entirely captivated. She leaned in, the distance between them evaporating, when the heavy oak doors of the study swung open. Dominic's underboss, a broad-shouldered man named Lorenzo, stepped in. "Boss, we have a problem at the South Side port." Dominic immediately dropped her hand, his demeanor snapping back to the cold, calculating Mafia Don. "What is it?" "Customs is raiding our shipping containers," Lorenzo said, wiping sweat from his brow. Someone tipped them off to the weapons shipment. As Lorenzo reached into his jacket for his phone, something slipped from his pocket and clattered onto the hardwood floor. Chloe instinctively knelt to pick it up. It was a small orange prescription bottle, but it wasn't a standard pharmacy bottle. Chloe's eyes locked onto the label. It was a specialized, highly restricted coagulant, Surgical Fibrilla, used strictly in high-trauma surgical wards to stop severe internal bleeding. Specifically, it was the exact proprietary batch Northwestern Memorial and Mercy General used. Lorenzo snatched the bottle from her hands, his eyes flashing with sudden, dangerous panic. "Just some blood pressure meds," he grunted, stuffing it back into his pocket. Chloe stood up, her medical training screaming at her. That wasn't blood pressure medication. It was a surgical supply that could only be requisitioned by a senior doctor. A doctor like Alan Holloway. She looked at Dominic, who was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. Lorenzo was the rat. The moment Lorenzo left the penthouse, Chloe turned to Dominic. Her pulse was racing, but her voice was surprisingly steady. "Dominic, that bottle Lorenzo dropped wasn't for blood pressure. It's a highly restricted surgical hemostat. It requires a chief surgeon's override to even access the supply closet. Dominic froze, his amber eyes darkening into a terrifying abyss. The betrayal hit him silently, but the violent shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable. Lorenzo was the only one who knew my exact route the night I was shot, Dominic whispered, the puzzle pieces clicking together. He's been feeding information to Holloway, who passes it to the Morettis. Lorenzo gets my throne when I die. Within an hour, the penthouse transformed into a war room. Dominic didn't execute Lorenzo immediately. Instead, he fed his underboss a false piece of intel. Dominic would be personally inspecting a warehouse at the Navy Pier docks at midnight, highly vulnerable and lightly guarded. "You stay here," Dominic told Chloe as he loaded a sleek Beretta 92 FS. "I end this tonight." "No," Chloe said, stepping into his path. She wore a dark trench coat, her jaw set with a stubbornness she didn't know she possessed. "If Holloway is there, he knows my face. If Lorenzo realizes he's been made and calls off the hit, they'll come for me again. I'm going with you. Keep me in the armored car, but do not leave me behind." Dominic stared at her, an undeniable flash of dark admiration in his eyes. He nodded once. The rain had returned to Chicago by the time the armored navigator pulled into the abandoned warehouse district. Lightning illuminated the rusted steel beams and broken windows. Chloe sat in the back of the SUV with two heavily armed guards, watching the monitors connected to the security cameras Dominic's team had quietly installed that afternoon. On the screen, Lorenzo arrived with a dozen heavily armed Moretti soldiers, and standing nervously in the back, wearing a damp raincoat, was Dr. Alan Holloway. Dominic stepped out from the shadows of the warehouse, completely unarmed, his hands resting in the pockets of his tailored coat. "Lorenzo," Dominic's voice echoed through the cavernous space, amplified by a hidden PA system. "You brought guests." Lorenzo raised his weapon, sneering. "It's over, Dominic. The Morettis promised me the south side. You're yesterday's news." "I am the city, Lorenzo," Dominic replied coldly. Before Lorenzo could pull the trigger, the warehouse erupted. Dominic's snipers, hidden in the catwalks, unleashed a coordinated, devastating volley of suppressed gunfire. The Moretti soldiers dropped before they even knew they were surrounded. In a matter of seconds, only Lorenzo and Dr. Holloway were left standing, both disarmed and forced to their knees. Dominic signaled the SUV. One of the guards opened the door for Chloe. Her legs felt like lead, but she forced herself to walk into the warehouse, the scent of gunpowder and ozone thick in the air. Holloway looked up, his face draining of all color when he saw her. "Chloe?" "Nurse Dempsey. Please, tell them. Tell him I'm a good man. I was forced." "You burned my home," Chloe said, her voice echoing in the vast, bloody space. She looked at the man who had once lectured her on the Hippocratic Oath. "You sent killers to murder one of your own nurses to cover your gambling debts. You aren't a doctor anymore. You're a butcher." Dominic stepped behind Holloway, placing the cold barrel of his pistol against the back of the surgeon's head. But before he pulled the trigger, he looked at Chloe. "I can end them both," Dominic said softly, ignoring the trembling men at his feet. "But this is the point of no return for you, Mia Luce. In my jacket pocket is a forged passport, a new identity, and a flight to Zurich leaving in 2 hours. You can walk away right now, clean and rich, or—" He paused, his eyes burning into hers with absolute, possessive devotion. "Or you stay. You accept this world. You accept me. But if you choose me, Chloe, I will never let you go. You will be the queen of this syndicate, and God help anyone who ever looks at you the wrong way again." Chloe looked at the passport protruding from his coat pocket. A safe, quiet, lonely life in Switzerland. Then she looked at the beautiful, terrifying mafia boss who had torn the city apart to keep her breathing. The man whose life she had saved with her bare hands. She didn't reach for the passport. Instead, she stepped forward, reaching out to gently brush a raindrop from the lapel of Dominic's suit. "I've always hated the cold in Switzerland anyway," Chloe murmured. A dark, triumphant smile spread across Dominic's face. He pulled her flush against his chest, capturing her lips in a bruising, possessive kiss that tasted of rain and absolute power. Behind them, a single gunshot echoed through the warehouse, followed swiftly by a second. Chloe didn't flinch. She simply wrapped her arms around the boss of the Rossi syndicate, finally embracing the shadows. What a thrilling descent into the criminal underworld. Chloe went from a struggling nurse to the untouchable queen of the Rossi syndicate in the blink of an eye. Would you have taken the flight to Switzerland or stayed with the dangerous mafia boss? Let us know your choice in the comments below. If you loved this intense mafia romance, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and make sure to subscribe for more dramatic stories.